A Navy ship is racing to a remote Atlantic Ocean island to rescue 3 stranded fishermen from Cape Town. The men are marooned in an isolated bay on Gough Island. They were on a small boat that capsized in rough seas while inspecting the trawler's nets. The 2 men drowned, but the others were washed ashore on the island. South African meteorologists staffing a weather station on the island cannot reach the survivors. E-News reporter Gerard van Niekerk is aboard the SAS Protea that left Cape Town yesterday on its rescue mission. We will bring you the full story when the ship returns in just over a week.
The call came as the officers and the crew aboard the South African Navy's SAS Protea were planning a survey of the East London coastline. Disaster had struck in the hostile South Atlantic Ocean. 2 fishermen from Cape Town were dead, drowned when their boats capsized. 3 others had been washed ashore on a remote stretch of Gough Island. Now they were trapped without food or shelter. Captain Smiley Reeder was amongst those who heard the urgent call on ships in the area.
Roger, I'm listening, over.
But the Protea was 1,500 nautical miles away. It would take 5 days to reach Gough Island. Then the instruction came from the naval base at Simonstown: change course and head west. The Protea was chosen because on board it had one vital piece of equipment that could save the marooned fishermen: an Alouette helicopter. A chopper was sent from Cape Town to drop off a doctor and deliver equipment needed for the rescue. With new instructions, officers gathered on the bridge. Charts were studied and routes mapped out. The ship's giant 12-cylinder engines were fired up, and the rescue mission was underway. A British possession since 1938, Gough Island is not on any tourist map. Formed over 1 million years ago from volcanic rock, it's a hostile and isolated place. And yet, it's teeming with life, home to countless birds, seals and mice. With sheer cliffs ringing the coastline, the island is only 14 kilometers long. But parts of it rise over 900 meters above sea level, making much of the island inaccessible. The southern end of the island is the only area that drops below 300 meters. These pictures of Gough Island were taken in the 1950s by Captain Ted Coote, skipper of one of the many crayfish boats that operated in these waters. Lying on the edge of the roaring 40s, winters on Gough Island are harsh. Howling gales, torrential rain, and even snowstorms lash the island. Apart from the seal hunters who occasionally stayed on the island in the 1800s, Gough Island was uninhabited. Then, in 1956, scientists from the South African Weather Bureau set up base on the island. In return for using the island as a weather station, the South African government pays Britain £1 a year. The weather station remains the only permanent man-made structure on Gough Island. And apart from the occasional biologist, nobody else is allowed to live here. Access to the island is prohibited without written permission from the administrator of Tristan da Cunha, 350 kilometers away. With 54 bird species recorded, Gough Island has been rated as possibly the world's most important seabird colony. During Operation Gondola, there were serious concerns that the enormous number of birds could threaten the helicopter rescue. Virtually untouched by man, the island was declared a World Heritage Site 5 years ago. It's also a wildlife preserve. Unlicensed fishing and the use of drift nets is outlawed, and pollution from the weather station and passing ships is closely monitored. The seal hunters and whalers are long gone. But tons of crayfish have been hauled from these waters for over half a century. Like many before it, the Edinburgh was just one more ship harvesting this white gold from the seabed. Using methods that have changed little over the years, Derek Gondola and Patrick Watson set off in a small powerboat to drop their lines at a nearby spot. A heavy swell was running, but nothing too unusual for these parts. Besides, it was the only trip of the season, and the men had to catch, regardless of the conditions. In the shadow of Gough Island's towering black cliffs, disaster struck. A wave capsized the boat. The crew aboard the Edinburgh watched helplessly. Patrick Watson was washed into the isolated rocky beach called Battle Bay. Derek Gondola drowned, his body retrieved by the Edinburgh. Two days later, 3 men set out from the Edinburgh in an inflatable dinghy, hoping to get supplies to Watson. Three times they tried to fire a line onto the rocky beach. 3 times the rocket failed. As they returned to the Edinburgh, disaster struck for a second time. The dinghy capsized and they were thrown into the sea. Frank Wagenstrom and Dion Davids made it ashore. The body of Quentin Apollost washed up near them. There were no more dinghies aboard the Edinburgh. The 3 men were stranded in Battle Bay, the most inaccessible part of the island.
She doesn't shave under the arms, what do you say?
No, she does. She does.
She does?
By the time the Protea changed course for Gough Island, the men had been marooned for nearly a week. They would have to endure another 5 days before help arrived. Aboard the naval survey ship, time passed slowly. Back on Gough Island, Wagenstrom, Watson and Davids were living off penguin eggs and drinking from a nearby waterfall. Desperately hungry, they caught and ate one of the many emperor penguins living among the rocks. Someone suggested making a raft and trying to reach the Edinburgh. The idea was abandoned. Days later, a fishing boat from nearby Tristan da Cunha managed to get basic supplies to the men. In radio contact with their parent ship for the first time, the survivors were told to hang on. The Navy was on its way. Back on board the Protea, Captain Reeder was worried about the weather. Stormy seas could mean a long wait before even attempting the rescue. The radar swept the empty horizon. On day 5, Gough Island was sighted. It had been 13 days since the disaster, and nearly a week since the crew of the Protea had seen land. Captain Reeder gathered his team for a final briefing on the rescue operation. On a mission like this, there was no margin for error. Then it was time for action. The helicopter crew was all too aware that the human cargo would include a dead body. Like an animal refusing to leave its wounded young, the Edinburgh still lay at anchor off Battle Bay. Amid mounting tension, rescue workers and medical personnel shared a quiet moment ahead of the rescue attempt. In the lee of the island's lonely cliffs, Operation Gondola neared its climax. The Alouette took off with a doctor on board. Silence descended on the Navy boat as officers and crew prayed that nothing would go wrong. Through binoculars, some strained to catch a glimpse of the operation. Everyone knew that the small window of good weather could start closing at any moment. It was at this spot 2 weeks earlier that the fishermen were tossed into the sea by giant 7-meter swells, waves that claimed the lives of 2 men. But for now, the weather gods were smiling. Dwarfed by the cliffs, the crew of the Edinburgh was also anxiously waiting the rescue operation. For those aboard the chopper, it wasn't difficult to spot the stranded fishermen beneath the makeshift shelter. A piece of canvas that was home for almost 2 weeks. These photographs, taken by the doctor, showed that even if scientists from the weather station had been able to make it across the island, the cliffs would have made any rescue impossible. While the survivors were being winched up into the chopper, the crew of the Protea watched and waited. Then, a wave of relief as the Alouette returned. With less than an hour of favorable conditions remaining, the pilot wasted no time bringing his chopper into land on the rolling deck. Safety at last for the 3 men who had spent long days and dark nights trapped on Gough Island. First to land, Frank Wagenstrom was given a warm welcome onto the Protea. Next, Patrick Watson was brought on board. The third survivor, Dion Davids, spent only a few minutes on the Protea. He chose to go back to his ship and continue fishing instead of returning home to Cape Town. Then, a sad moment as the body of Derek Ngala was piped aboard the Protea. He had been the first casualty. Minutes later, the chopper landed with the body of Quinton Apollos. The 42-year-old fisherman had washed up on Battle Bay, his corpse watched over by 3 survivors. For the captain and crew of the Protea, it was a proud moment. They had pulled off Operation Gondola without a hitch. All that remained was an inspection and a return to routine for the long haul back to Simonstown. With a friendly escort provided by some of the locals, the Protea sailed out of Battle Bay, leaving Gough Island to disappear in its wake.
Daar was eerst de tijd dat ik moet opbeginnen, maar de tijd dat ik alleen aangewezen heb, heb ik begin moet opbeginnen. En ik denk als alleen is roppen, is voelen. Ik allemaal de goede kan bekleinen, want die goede is allemaal net zo groot en ik als maar dan. Ik weet dat ik die roppen kan bekleien op die penguins. Want in de ene moet ik eerst ook opslapen, in de andere ook moet ik toeslapen. En ik moet op natte rotsen geslapen en ik was ook nat en koud. Ik had hoop opgegeven, plek, ik had het gebed. Dus alle zal dan komen naar terug naar mij toe. Ik zal het maar je dat weer kansen krijgen in je leven.
Why would you travel such a distance to pick up civilians? I mean, they have nothing to do with the Navy.
Well, it's an unwritten law amongst seamen that if there's another seaman in danger, you will always go to his assistance. Because of the fact that we're working in such an inhospitable environment, a very hostile environment. If somebody is in trouble, as I say, unwritten law of the sea, go to his assistance.
Eerste ding wat in mijn kop gegaan, ik heb net één ding gecheckt. Dus als ik weer gered kan worden, of als hij helpt voor mijn visie. Ik was moeg en nat, en mijn voeten was zeer, mijn gezicht was opgezweld. En dat is wat ik aan gedenken, tijd, hij wou me niet. Alles is niet in mijn kop gegaan. Zolang ek net 'n gesonde ding nog lewe.
What did you think when you saw the ship?
All I said, glory, praise God. At last, our arrival is at hand. The arrival of help is at hand, and all our hearts went open to know that soon we're gonna be back on a boat, and then we go back to our families, and there were just so many thoughts going through us. I can't tell you what, but is the idea of seeing the Navy ship. I thought that a Navy ship is grey, but I saw this white ship. It looked like a passenger line. I said, look, a passenger line is on its way. But as it came nearer, I saw that it was a Navy ship, and the chopper came with the Navy, the SS Protea. So what a moment for us. The experience was just indescribable, but eventually we got onto the chopper, and then the chopper took us to the boat, and we were met by the SAS Protea's crew, and they welcomed us on board, and they were very joyful crew, spontaneous, and it's good to be back here on a big boat, secured and all.
Ek sal altyd onthou die tyd toe ek so bekleed in die see en die klippe. Dit was 'n groot experience vir my gewees. Wel, ek kan swem, ek het survival gedoen, ek het IDR, wat al op my mind gekom het. Daai oomblik, hoe sterk die see gewees het, dat ek genoeg krag het om te geveg het. Ek het net gedink een ding, Here help my. Ek hoop ek waar die swel hier gaan sit, weet ek nie. Maar as dit kon sy, is net dankbaar vir daai. So ek op die klippe beland en daar het alles die verhaal begin vanaf die klippe. Daar is so ver en ek het 'n paar valse tande gegee, het my tande het my net val op die wal. Die was op my sy om my gewees. Toe ek weer kyk om my tande te gryp, toe half my byt weg om my valse tande.
Now, this is also your last trip as captain on board this ship. What goes through your mind when something like this happens?
How does one put it? I think a captain is married to the ship. I've got 2 marriages. I've got my wife and family at home, and I've got the ship itself. Yeah, we're expecting a nice, quiet, hard-working survey trip. This came as a surprise, and it was nice to have gone to somebody's assistance and been part of a rescue mission like this. Yeah, I think it's the cherry on top, if I can put it that way.
Two of the 3 fishermen rescued from Gough Island by the South African Navy have arrived safely back home. The third has opted to carry on fishing in the South Atlantic despite their ordeal. The 3 were marooned on the desolate island for nearly 2 weeks in terrible conditions. Gerard van Niekerk was aboard the SAS Protea for this exclusive report of the dramatic rescue.
It is called Operation Gondola, a mission to rescue 3 fishermen marooned on the remote South Atlantic island. With the lives of South Africans in danger, the Navy went full steam ahead to reach out a helping hand.
It's an unwritten law among seamen that if there's another seaman in danger, you always go to his assistance. because of the fact that we're working in such an inhospitable environment, a very hostile environment. If somebody is in trouble, as I say, 100 miles the sea to go to his assistance.
The Navy rerouted the SAS Protea to Gough Island, more than 1,500 nautical miles from Cape Town. Fighting rough weather and big swells, it took the hydrographic survey ship 5 days to reach the island. Attempts to reach the stranded fishermen by boat or from the weather station on the island were abandoned. The only way to reach them was by helicopter. An Alouette from 22 Squadron flew to the small bay on the northern side of the island. A Defence Force doctor and a medic were lowered down to assist the survivors. The rescue was completed within an hour. The 3 survivors and the bodies of 2 companions who had drowned were returned to the Protea.
All I said, glory, praise God. At last, our arrival is at hand. The arrival of help is at hand, and all our hearts went open to know that soon we're gonna be back on a boat, and then we go back to our families.
The drama also had its lighter moments.
En ik het op af. Tyd my tande te monet val op die bal. Jy was op my sy om my gewees. Toe ek weer kyk my tande te gryp toe half my weer om my val se tande.
And while it was a joyous occasion for some, 2 families are now grieving their loss. But the tragedy had not put the survivors off fishing. One returned immediately to the trawler, the Edinburgh, to continue working. For them, it's the only life they know. Gerard van Niekerk, E-News, Simonstown.
Joining me live in the studio is our reporter Gerard van Niekerk, who went on the rescue mission. Gerard, how did the men end up on Gough Island?
Really, the fishermen were inspecting nets just off the island. They were fishing, and they were caught by huge swells and a wave, and 2 of the fishermen landed on the island. They then sent a rescue craft to get food to the people on the island. They also landed up on the island, and 3 survivors were on the island, and 1 person then drowned.
Are there any people living permanently on the island?
The only people on the weather station, where we get our weather reports from, 3 scientists, but the rest of the island nobody lives there.
Why, you said earlier that a ship had to go and take them food there. Why couldn't the people from the weather station supply them with food or even get them off out of the situation?
In fact, the people from the weather station tried to reach them, but as you can see in the pictures, it's very steep cliffs. It looks very much like Chapman's Peak, if you can compare that with anything.
We saw 2 or 3 of the men who came back. What was their condition like?
Well, they were very dirty, and obviously sitting on an island for 2 weeks is no joke. They then returned to the ship, and first thing they asked for was a shower and a cigarette.
Yeah. Gerard van Niekerk, thank you very much.
2 South African fishermen rescued from Gough Island spent much of today resting. They were also given medical checkups at a Cape Town hospital. The men were airlifted off Gough Island, 2,500 kilometers from Cape Town. They had been stranded there for almost a fortnight. This report from Gerard van Niekerk, who was on board the SAS Protea during the rescue.
After spending nearly 2 weeks on a remote Atlantic Ocean island, 3 South African fishermen are lucky to be alive. They were marooned after their dinghies capsized while fishing near Gough Island. The South African Navy sent a ship racing to their rescue. And in a daring rescue mission, a helicopter from 22 Squadron airlifted them out of the isolated Battle Bay. Frank Wagenstroom, Patrick Watson and Dion Davids survived extreme weather conditions. They stayed in contact with their ship via portable VHF radio. All they had to eat were a few oranges, a loaf of bread and some sweets. They even caught and ate an emperor penguin and some eggs found on the rocky area. The survivors shared their living space with seals, birds and mice. Once aboard the SAS Protea, the men were examined by the army doctor. One of the survivors chose to return to his mothership to continue working. The bodies of the two fishermen who drowned, Quinton Apollos and Derek Ngalo, returned to Simonstown on the Protea yesterday. They will be buried later this week. Gerard van Niekerk, E-News, Cape Town.